From the New York Times, this is the New Washington. I'm Michael Barbaro. Today, Senator Mitch McConnell.
Our top political priority over the next 2 years should be to deny President Obama a second term.
I think Donald Trump can win.
I do.
Are you going to support him?
I am. The next president, whoever that may be, is going to be the person who chooses the next Supreme Court justice. Nevertheless, she persisted. There's only one way to truly fix Obamacare. Only one way. And that's a full repeal. So, Mr. President, this is, clearly a disappointing moment when you have the White House. The most important member of your party is the person in the White House. Did you see my quarterback there?
Yes, I did, actually.
358 yards passing, 135 yards running. Counted for 6 touchdowns.
500 yards total offense, one person.
Carl Hulse, who did you talk to this week?
Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, and, of course, the Senate Majority Leader. Seems to be throwing better.
Well, they worked in the offseason about staying under center more and going through its progression.
Big supporter of the University of Louisville sports, the football team. He follows them religiously.
He's still got all the raw talent, but he's playing smarter.
Let's just talk for a little bit about kind of who the Senate Majority Leader is. What is this guy all about?
Mitch McConnell is about political power. He's about exercising political power. He's a student of history. He's a student of the Senate. And he worked as a lawyer in Kentucky, became a county executive in Louisville, and then jumped from there to the Senate in actually a very famous campaign where one of his commercials is still famous to this day, where he had bloodhounds trying to track down his opponent, Dee Huddleston.
Ever since this race began, Dee Huddleston has been running away from his record. But now Kentucky is closing in. Against school prayer, give away our Panama Canal.
They, were making the case that Huddleston wasn't around doing the job for Kentucky. That remains a famous ad today. And you know who the architect of that ad was?
No, who was it?
Roger Ailes.
Roger Ailes. This is the founder of Fox News, who died earlier this year.
Switch to Mitch McConnell for U.S. Senate.
Mitch McConnell is known as a great strategist on the Senate floor, knows the rules inside out, been able to use some trickery in the past to get his way. He's not known as a very strong policy guy. He's not about legislation. His thing is to go, here's what I want to accomplish. How do I do it? And let's use the rules to our advantage to get that done or to prevent something from happening.
And McConnell is someone who is really at the pinnacle of his career, I'd imagine. He's the leader of a Republican Senate and has a Republican president.
And a Republican House.
McConnell's wife is in the president's cabinet, Elaine Chao, the Secretary of Transportation. So this should theoretically be a magical moment in the career of Mitch McConnell. And yet,
President Trump taking to Twitter, going after Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell.
The president has repeatedly and pointedly criticized him.
Let's just look at the president's tweet this morning. Can you believe that Mitch McConnell, who has screamed repeal and replace for 7 years, couldn't get it done?
McConnell has failed to pass a health care bill that he's been talking about for years.
But I said, Mitch, get to work and let's get it done.
As we discussed on last week's show, there was a fiscal deal between the president and the leaders of the Democratic Party in Congress that left McConnell seeming betrayed by a president of his own party.
We had a very productive meeting with President Trump, Leader McConnell, Speaker Ryan.
Then we had Steve Bannon out there saying that he's ready to wage war against mainstream Republicans.
I think Mitch McConnell, and to a degree, Paul Ryan. They do not want Donald Trump's populist, economic, nationalist agenda to be implemented.
And on and on. It just feels like this is not a magical moment at all.
Well, it wasn't an optimum moment to sit down with him in some respects because he was not that happy. Just to kind of get us going, do you watch 60 Minutes?
No, I didn't.
So I'm sure you've heard about it, that Steve Bannon basically declared war on the Republican establishment, which he somehow has come to define as you and Paul Ryan, and said he's going to primary people and that sort of thing, and we can talk a little bit about that, but what's just your basic reaction to that?
I don't have any reaction to it.
It doesn't bother you that he is talking about primary incumbents?
I don't have any reaction to it.
So, to move on from there, the
Carl, I mean,
might not have been my best opening question ever. And I think there's a couple things that I should say about this. One, Mitch McConnell is famous in Washington for refusing to answer a question that he does not want to answer. He just won't do it. And on the Bannon thing, I think that Mitch McConnell has just made the calculation that he is not going to dignify Steve Bannon by even mentioning his name or talking about it. Why should he get drawn into a fight with Bannon? Because that's only going to benefit Bannon in his mind. So I have to take one more run at this. You're just going to let Steve Bannon go unanswered here?
Yes.
The guy is honestly attacking you in an unusual way for somebody who was in the White House.
I don't have anything to say about it.
Will you at some point, do you think? Or
I doubt it.
Carl, listening to this interview with McConnell, who I've never really listened to at length, other than at a press conference or on the floor of the Senate, I'm really struck by how, to use an SAT word, laconic he is. I mean, he's just doesn't seem like somebody who uses more words than he has to. He doesn't seem like somebody who's very effusive, and he doesn't feel like somebody who is a communicator, which is really fascinating because he is the most powerful Republican in the United States Senate, a body made famous for the loquaciousness and eloquence of its leaders throughout American history. So what's this all about?
I don't think he will ever be called the great communicator, Michael. To Mitch McConnell, communication is giving things away, and that's putting him at a disadvantage. If he tells people what he is up to, they may be able to use that against him. And we've also talked in the past, you told me one time that when you got here, you just really wish you'd been the senator that all the reporters would chase down.
I was hoping some reporter would ask me a question about anything.
Yeah, right. But you don't feel that way so much anymore, right?
Now I spend most of my time smiling sweetly at you guys and walking on by.
Yeah. Now, he's not the only majority leader. There's been some in the past. You have a lot of senators who like to take the floor and go on, as you said, for hours. But majority leaders sometimes, and Harry Reid, he didn't tell us what was going on all the time. And George Mitchell, I used to talk to one of his press people and say, wow, can't we get something here? And the answer was George Mitchell wanted to be convinced how talking to the press was going to help him get 60 votes in the Senate. And so sometimes they just keep it to themselves.
So, Carl, let's talk about this fiscal deal that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi made with President Trump in the White House almost 2 weeks ago.
Earlier today, the president, quote, blindsided Republican congressional leaders, according to a Republican official, by quickly agreeing with Democrats on a plan to tie funding for Harvey recovery to a 3-month extension on the country's debt limit and a stopgap spending bill.
So basically, the president agreed with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, or Chuck and Nancy, as they are now going to be called all over Washington forever.
And the popular read on this deal that was struck with the Democratic congressional leaders is that it was a win for Chuck Schumer and the Democrats, and it was a loss for Senator McConnell and for Paul Ryan. But McConnell has a different version of events.
So let's talk a little bit about last week. What did you think of the deal that Schumer and Pelosi and the president made?
Well, it wasn't what I think the speaker and I had in mind.
Well, first, I would have to say that Senator McConnell, and maybe part of any tension you felt in this interview or at the beginning of the interview, was Senator McConnell was not happy of his portrayal, even in a column that I wrote and in just news coverage in general about how this deal looked for him. And he wanted to make it pretty clear that it wasn't all it was cracked up to be for the Democrats. So there may be some misinterpretation by people, including maybe people in this room, if you want to talk about
Let's put it this way. The deal's not quite as good as my counterpart thought it was. And I think I can safely say that the debt ceiling and the spending issue in December will be decoupled. because the debt ceiling will not come up until sometime in 2018.
And Carl, just to be sure I understand this, the Democrats talked of this deal as if there was a simultaneous running out of federal funding that just makes the United States work, and the next vote on whether the U.S. can borrow more than the current debt ceiling.
Right. They actually thought they were linked at that point and assumed they would be.
And McConnell's saying, no, they're not linked. And if you thought those two things linked were good for you and your negotiating position the next time this thing comes up for a vote, like I actually worked around that in the final legislation, and they're not at all linked, and therefore you don't have the negotiating power at all that you thought you did.
Correct. That's his interpretation. So the fabled leverage might not be as leverageable as some people might think.
Precisely. The point being, one of the advantages of being the majority leader is you control the paper. And the minority leader and his team were trying to get us not to write it that way. I did write it that way, and that's the way it passed.
Do you think that they were a little too happy with their deal?
May have spiked the ball in the end zone a little too soon.
So, Carl, you asked McConnell about undocumented immigrants who are young, who were affected by DACA, which the president just terminated.
So, DACA. What do you personally think should happen there? Do you think that these kids who were brought in should be given a chance to stay?
Well, our criticism of Obama was, as you recall, related to the fact that he had frequently said he couldn't do it, didn't have the authority to do it, and then did it. So I think there's widespread sympathy for these young people who have known no other country but ours, but a feeling that if you're going to fix that problem, you ought to do it in a legal way. And I believe that's what President Trump has said. And so he's invited us to take it up again, and we'll take a look at it.
I mean, do you say you get to a bill there? Do you think that you would support something if it's tied to border?
Look, we've got 6 months to. I've got more pressing issues right now. We've got 6 months to address that, and the president said, he might even at the end of 6 months. We don't know quite what he would do. So I think we have time to address it.
So, Carl, he's both demonstrating some sympathy for these dreamers and a bit of humanity, but then he's also saying it's not that pressing an issue for him, which is striking because the whole point of DACA and it being eliminated is that it's created a clock that's ticking for young people that may result in their deportation. Do you think if McConnell wanted to support legislation that would protect dreamers, he would just come out and say that?
Well, I mean, I agree that, if you're somebody a dreamer who's out there wondering what's going to happen, this wasn't particularly good news, right? Because he's not going to race to the rescue. Although other people in Congress are, and Mitch McConnell, if he sees the votes are there, he'll generally go in that direction. But Mitch McConnell's clock is different. Mitch McConnell's got another clock ahead of him. It's like, I've got to get tax reform done. I've got to deal with the spending bill. I've got to deal with the debt limit down the road now. These things are coming too. But it's obviously not a priority with him. He's not going to expend a lot of current political capital on that. Other folks are going to have to make that happen if it needs to happen now. But he remains open to it. I don't think he's opposed to it.
It sounds like he's not someone who ever reveals his legislative strategies anyway. But you're saying this is as deep a glimpse into the heart of this legislator as you're likely to get?
Yeah, I thought it was I actually kind of thought it was a telling comment. But I can see where it would be worrisome because people think that you're going to use that 6 months to come up with a bill. Well, as we see, that's not how Congress works. And there's probably going to need to be more pressure put on them to come to some agreement. So here's something that really has occurred to me since last year. Your handling of the Supreme Court vacancy. To me, you gave the president the signature achievement of his presidency so far.
You made a great point to McConnell in this interview that he essentially has handed Trump his biggest, perhaps his only real legislative accomplishment so far, which was the Senate confirmation of Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch.
The nomination of Neil M. Gorsuch of Colorado to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States is confirmed.
What he did with Merrick Garland, who was President Obama's nominee for the Supreme Court and didn't even get a hearing, let alone a confirmation vote. This was a brilliant move as far as the hard-right conservatives were concerned. It preserved that seat for President Trump to make his own appointment of Neil Gorsuch. I actually thought that there would be more goodwill left over from that and that Mitch McConnell would escape their wrath in the years to come, but they are already unhappy with him for some of the things he's done this year and are putting some primary challengers out there against the incumbents that Mitch McConnell wants to win re-election. I thought you'd get a longer reprieve from some of these outside groups for doing that. I mean, did you think you'd get any kind of break?
Well, maybe it's an example of what have you done for me lately. But if you look at the consequences of it, it was immensely important, not only to the president's election in bringing Republicans home so that 9 out of 10 of them voted for Donald Trump, just like they did for Mitt Romney. It also put somebody not quite 50 on the Supreme Court who it appears is very similar to Nino Scalia and Clarence Thomas, a very important accomplishment for conservatives in America.
Yet, all of a sudden, boom, they're like, Mitch McConnell is the swamp. I mean, is there no appreciation for that?
Was it Harry Truman who said, if you want a friend in Washington, buy a dog?
You know, and you're somebody who actually can really take this from my experience over the years. You still have that wall in your office, right, that's filled with all the nasty editorial cartoons about you.
Yeah, I've taken a few slings over the years and arrows.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem to bother you?
No, I don't have any trouble sleeping at all.
Because you think you're doing the right thing?
I do.
But I wonder if the fact that he absorbs all of these mocking, taunting criticisms from the president and is pretty reluctant to criticize him, does that make McConnell a pushover, or does it make him somebody who recognizes that his job requires him to somewhat painfully and unenviably mediate a relationship between the president and his own party?
Not to mention his own wife. I don't think that Mitch McConnell is a pushover. I think that, the title of his memoir was The Long Game, and I think Mitch McConnell is a guy who's playing the long game. Taxes. Mm-hmm. Can you get that done this year?
We can certainly get it done, and I think we will.
You asked McConnell about tax reform, which seems next up for the Republicans in Congress as the thing they want to tackle.
I'm not inclined to put arbitrary deadlines on things because it seems like everything always takes longer in Congress than you hope it would.
That is my experience, Senator.
Yeah, but there's nothing that unifies Republicans more than the tax issue. It's been a unifying issue for a long time, going back to Ronald Reagan.
Is he being overconfident to think that the Republican majority in the Senate can get something this big done, given its track record so far?
Well, I think the first caution I would say there is that he says himself he didn't want to put a hard deadline on it because that could come back to haunt them, because once they miss that deadline, we begin battering them. But he thinks they can do it. I don't think it's a sure thing. Given past experience, I don't think that there's a reason to be real optimistic that they can pull this off. But there is a Republican motivation here that was probably somewhat lacking on the health care bill.
Do you think that McConnell actually likes this job right now?
Yeah, I mean, he's still the majority leader of the United States Senate. He gets to set the agenda in the Senate, no matter how much Trump might be dealing with Chuck and Nancy. So I think he has been unhappy with the way things have gone the past few months, but I think that, like I said, he's also playing a long game here and sees the opportunity to get things done. He's been around the Senate. He knows being majority leader is a tough job, but you get to call the shots. You know, when you walk out there every morning, the president of the Senate, who's ever in the chair, recognizes the majority leader first. You know, you talked a little bit there, just to digress a little, about being majority leader. This is the job you craved, right? Since you've been in the Senate, to be running the Senate. But it certainly has its ups and downs, right?
I never thought it'd be easy. I've observed other majority leaders of both parties in the time that I've been here. It's a challenging job.
But you wouldn't trade it?
Well, why would I whine about doing a job that I wanted to do just because it's hard?
You're the longest-serving senator from Kentucky now. You know, growing up there, did you ever imagine that you would be in this position?
No.
I mean, what's it mean to you?
Well, it's been a very rewarding experience, and I'm not writing any epitaphs right now.
You don't plan on going anywhere. Well, I really appreciate your time. I know these are hard issues, and I know you're not the biggest fan of sitting down and going through there, so I give you credit for that, too. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Carl, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Michael, thank you. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to talk to you.
The New Washington is produced by Michael Simon Johnson and Michaela Bouchard. Brad Fisher is our engineer. Lisa Tobin is our executive producer. Samantha Hennig is our editorial director. Our theme music is by Jim Brunberg and Ben Lansford of Wonderly. That's it for The New Washington. See you back here next weekend.